Hi everyone, it's Claire Batkin from Your OT Tutor. This presentation is called When Your Client Asks You to Just Write Me a Letter. So what I'm going to be talking about is a scenario that I'm sure every OT working in the NDIS has encountered themselves or at least heard of. The situation where our client wants us to just write me a letter. It's a situation that can fire up a lot of OTs, and while there are situations where this may be called for, today I wanted to focus on a different approach where it's more than a yes or a no answer. In this presentation, I'll show you how you can use an OT framework that may be a flashback from your uni days, the Canadian Practice Process Framework, and how that can be the anchor we need to make sure that we aren't just giving a yes or no answer when we're asked to just write me a letter, but that we're going back to being a real OT first and exploring what is the functional issue that we need to address. But first, let's start by clarifying exactly what I'm talking about here. The just write me a letter scenario is where we get a referral and it already outlines what the client or the referrer wants us to prescribe. So there's no invitation to work our magic and assess the client's needs and come up with a solution. That solution has already been predefined. Now, this does happen in other funding models as well. I'm sure there are plenty of aged care clients who want us to just get them a mobility scooter, but it seems to be prominent in the NDIS because it's something that pops up in discussion forums and supervision sessions all the time. We hear stories like this. Can you write a letter so I can get 2-to-1 supports funded 24/7? Or the support coordinator asks, can you write Mary a letter so she can get a new mobility scooter with an attachment for her little dog? Or something that just sounds so ridiculous that you can't believe somebody would even bother to ask, can you write me a letter for Uber Eats? So, what do you think the typical response might be, especially at the moment when many OTs are frustrated and feeling underappreciated and undervalued already? I'll suggest that in the chaos and time constraints of NDIS, we're just going to say, no, I can't write you a letter for that support. We save our energy, decline the referral, and the participant or referrer moves on down the list and continues their search for an NDIS OT who will just say yes. But if we do this, are we missing an opportunity to actually solve the problem? Or are we just kicking the can down the road for somebody else to deal with? As frustrating as it is, and I get it, it's extremely frustrating when it feels like someone is telling you how to do your job, or worse, thinking it's so easy that we just need to type up a quick letter and the NDIA will oblige. But if we can just pause, let that frustration out somewhere else, then circle back to the client and reframe the situation in a way that harnesses the power of an actual OT process, could we be achieving better outcomes for our clients? And at the same time, also highlighting the value of just what OT can do. So this is what I'm going to show you in this presentation. And yes, you will have some flashbacks to your uni days when I show you how an OT framework can help you do this. So this is the Canadian Practice Process Framework, or the CPPF. It outlines an 8-step OT process that can be applied to any OT setting, even NDIS work. It starts with screening the referral and continues all the way through to discharging the client. It involves a process of identifying functional issues, setting goals, making therapy plans that are implemented, monitored, and modified before evaluating to make sure that what we actually did made a difference for our clients. When we get those referrals to just write me a letter, if we jump in with a yes or a no, we're essentially entering the process here. But what we need to do is enter the process back here at the start, because if we don't, we're missing all these steps. And it's actually at these steps where we're refining what the actual functional issue is and gathering detailed information so that we can be confident that the plan we're eventually implementing is likely to make an impact. So I'll take you through these 8 steps now in the context of one of these just write me a letter scenarios. And I'm going to go with the Uber Eats example. So something that seems so ridiculous that you just want to say no and save your energy. But let's try it a different way. So step 1 is enter initiate. And this is where instead of judging whether or not to accept the referral based on what they're requesting, we consider the referral holistically to see if we have the skills to help the person. So this means pausing, and instead of saying, sorry, the NDIS doesn't fund Uber Eats, we can't help with that referral. Instead, we say, thanks for that referral. So we can determine if we are the right OT to help you. Can you tell me a little bit more about your situation? So we need to know information like their age and the type of disability, because this will influence what is causing their need for Uber Eats in the first place. If you're an OT who specialises in working with people with physical impairments, but it seems the person's difficulty is stemming from a psychosocial disability, you may not be the best person for the job. At this stage, it's also important to set expectations with the client. So the 8-step CPPF process will only work if the participant is willing to explore the possibility that something other than Uber Eats could also work too, because we can gently tell them that even though others may be using NDIS funding for Uber Eats, and I'm sure it's happening, it's not something that NDIA will typically fund. So we need to be open to some backup alternatives. If they agree to this, then half the battle is done. The next step is set the stage, and apologies if you're looking at this with the pizza in the background and it's close to lunch, hang in there, you're nearly there. This is where we do more of an initial assessment to find out more about what's going on. What aspect of their disability is influencing their need for support with meal preparation in the first place? So this initial assessment allows us to move beyond only knowing the support that they want, which is the Uber Eats, to why they may want it, grounded in an occupation-focused understanding. So by doing this initial assessment, which can be as simple as a few well thought out targeted interview questions, we can start to get a feel for whether meal prep support is needed. So not is Uber Eats needed, is meal prep support needed? That interview may reveal that meal prep's difficult due to decreased fine motor dexterity, or poor standing balance, or high levels of fatigue, or difficulties with managing the complex executive functioning demands of choosing the meal, planning so that all the ingredients needed are purchased and fresh, then doing the actual multi-step, multitask process of cooking. So we start to get to feel for what is causing the issue and what we might need to explore further so that we can come up with a solution that will solve the functional problem, not just give a yes or no answer to writing a letter. But unfortunately, we need to remember that the NDIA won't just believe us if we say our client feels cooking is too difficult for them. We need to help gather the evidence to prove it, which is what happens at step 3, or assess, evaluate. We need to do detailed observations, often in the context of some sort of activity analysis, to see for ourselves where the difficulty might be. Not because we don't believe our clients, but because sometimes seeing it with our own eyes is what will help us to come up with a solution that works. And you know what? Maybe Uber Eats could work. Maybe they need a solution that removes the need for complex meal planning or stepping foot in the kitchen completely. But maybe the client will do best with a support that simplifies the process of meal prep without stripping it back completely. Maybe the answer is ready-made meals where the client still has a choice each day, but not the overwhelming choice of an Uber Eats app. And maybe they still have capacity to use a microwave to heat a meal fresh when they need it, instead of that lukewarm Uber Eats option. So you'll notice at this point, we're still just working out what support will actually work. So Uber Eats can still be on the table as an option, but we can keep reminding the client that it may not be an NDIS funded option. If it works for them, they can definitely self-fund that option. But if they can't and they need NDIS funded help, we need to look at something that is likely to be funded. At step 4, once we know what support will actually work, then we confirm the plan for what support we can ask for. And this is where we need to further unpack why the NDIA might say no, if the participant's still hopeful of getting that Uber Eats funded. So we can refer to the NDIS Would We Fund It pages and support lists, and that can be a helpful way to show the rules in black and white and to take the focus away from us being the bad guys. It's not us saying no, it's the NDIS rules saying no. But because we've spent some time exploring the reason why meal prep was difficult, we can try asking for a different support that the NDIA might actually fund. So this could be having a support worker bulk cook meals that the participant reheats as needed. It could be pre-prepared meals like Light and Easy, where the NDIS will fund the preparation component and the participant self-funds the food component. We know if these are likely to be effective and beneficial because we actually assess the client's function. Step 5 is to implement the plan. So in this case, it might be to write that letter or to add the justification to an FCA, or it might be that we need to test out our theory. Can the participant purchase some Coles frozen food options as a trial to make sure they can manage the task demands of just choosing and reheating? Do they have informal supports who could help with some bulk cooking as a one-off to see if that works? So we have some proof when asking for a support worker to take over this task long term. Step 6 is to monitor the results to see if it worked. If it did, and we haven't already, then we can write our letter. If it didn't, it's back to the drawing board to work out why it didn't work and what support is more likely to have success. This step will give us the evidence we need so that the support is effective and beneficial, value for money, and related to the participant's disability, so we can actually feel confident to back ourselves if the NDIA do say no. We'll be confident we know what the functional issue is and that what we're proposing is the best option. Step 7 is to evaluate the outcome. So if you write the letter, now you need to follow up once it's approved. Did it actually work? Did the person get the funding that they needed? And if they did and the support's being implemented, is it still working? Hopefully, because you've gone through a thorough process, the answer will be yes, it's funded, and yes, it's working, which will take you to step 8, conclude exit, which is where you can discharge your client. But hopefully, because you've demonstrated the power of a thorough OT process, your client will see you as more than someone who just writes letters. They'll see you as someone who is genuinely invested in finding collaborative solutions that work, and you'll stay on their list as their preferred OT the next time they have a difficulty with a functional task. Now, I will acknowledge the fact that many of you are probably thinking, Claire, you're living in a dream world. No one will have time to go through all those steps. But who says each step needs to take hours? We could actually go through that whole process in one session with the follow-up report, especially if the solution is immediately clear. It's not the time spent on each step that necessarily makes the difference. It's just making sure that each of these steps have been considered, and then suddenly what you need to do will become a whole lot clearer. So now that you've had the process unpacked, let's look at some of those other scenarios, including ones where we might actually just write a letter. So can you write me a letter that says I need 2-to-1 support 24/7? So in this case, you're probably thinking you'll need more than a letter, you'll need an FCA, but it could be that for this participant at face value, we're also thinking, no way, there's no way they need 2-to-1 support 24/7. We'll just say, no, we can't write a letter. But that was the old way of doing things. This is how you'll handle it now. We don't go in with our mind already made up and say, sorry, this just isn't realistic. We go in with an open mind and ask occupationally focused questions. Can you tell me more about what activities you're doing when a second person is needed? We go in and we actually observe some activities with our own eyes first to make sure there's no piece of the puzzle that's missing. Then, if it is unrealistic, we have that tricky conversation using objective evidence from the NDIA's own website where we say, sorry, we can't write that letter because there just isn't enough evidence that level of support is needed. And even though these are tough conversations and we will feel like the bad guy, at least we know our decision has been made based on sound clinical reasoning. So let's try another one. Can you write me a letter for a shower chair? This time we might actually be inclined to write a letter, but the answer isn't just, yeah, seems reasonable. It should be, yes, I may be able to, but can you tell me more about the difficulty you're having with showering? There might be some other things that we need to consider as well in case the shower chair doesn't fix everything by itself. And then the last one, can you write me a letter for some brain training apps for my phone? I want to improve my memory. So instead of, no, the NDIS probably won't fund these sorts of apps, you can say, can you tell me more about your difficulty with your memory? What things do you find hard to remember in your day-to-day routine? Remember, it doesn't need to be a yes or a no. It just needs to be an invitation to start the OT process, keeping the focus on function. Hopefully this was a helpful reminder to pause and reset our autopilot approach in situations like this. There's all my contact details. If you do have any questions or like to find out more about how I teach NDIS processes like this, jump onto the website or send me an email. Thanks for watching.